welcome. I'm Katy Wallace, naturopathic doctor with Human Nature, and today I'm talking about part 2 of the healthy gut-brain connection. So there are 4 major areas where we can support a healthy gut-brain connection that I want to talk about today. The first is general digestive health. So, do you have comfortable digestion? Are you free of pain and different digestive symptoms? Do you have regular and healthy bowel movements? Are you having reflux or burping a lot? Are you swallowing okay? So all of these encompass digestive health, and it's very important if you want to have a strong gut-brain connection that's positive and leads to greater wellness in life to make sure that your digestive health care is well supported. The next area would be supporting beneficial gut microbes or gut biota. And especially today, I'm going to talk about the species of bacteria that make the SCFAs, which are abbreviated here and stand for short chain fatty acids, because research recently has been highlighting how essential these are in preventing illness in our lives and promoting wellness. Next, I'm going to talk about the importance of hormone regulation, highlighting the hormone cortisol for healthy gut-brain connection. And then finally, I want to talk about ways to support vagal tone, since the vagus plays such a strong role in the connection. Sometimes we just need to do more to restore the healthy vagus nerve. All right, so number 1, we don't have time to talk about all the different ways to fix every digestive disorder, so I want to point you to my website, humannaturellc.com/news, where you can find a lot of different videos about digestive health. So for example, if you're having issues with regularity, constipation, you might want to check out the Smooth Moves video that's there. If you have heartburn or acid reflux, there's a lot of tips published in my free webinar, Overcoming a Sensitive Stomach. And I also talk about a lot of other digestive health related topics. Once you've got that covered, it's really important to move on to changing the diet to support and promote the beneficial gut biota, so the beneficial bacteria and microbes in the gut. This figure is a takeaway from an article that was published in 2024 in Nature Metabolism. It's a review of current research on how diet influences the gut microbes and how those influence the brain and our cognitive health. And I like this diagram. I know it's kind of complicated. There's a lot going on here, but I'd like you to focus at the bottom of the screen where you'll see the diet. So you can see in this area, we've got a healthy gut lining. If you haven't watched part 1 of this series, please go back, check out part 1, Introduction to Gut-Brain Connection, because I talk about these parts of the gut-brain axis. So this is the gut lining. And to have a healthy gut lining, you've got to have these components in the diet. You've got to have good dietary protein. So seafood, eggs, red meat are great examples of that. You've got to have lots of polyphenols. Polyphenols come from beneficial plant-based foods. So things that contain resveratrol, things like spices, cacao. Those are all examples of high polyphenol foods, berries. That help feed the good gut bacteria. You also want to have, if you tolerate it, some fermented foods like sauerkraut or maybe lacto-fermented dairy, if you tolerate that. And then finally, you need a lot of prebiotic dietary fiber. And I would emphasize here, you want the ones that make the short chain fatty acids. So you want to focus on resistant starch foods. I'll talk about that in a moment. What you want to avoid is a Western diet that's very high in carbohydrates and sugars, processed foods, bakery, and processed oils, trans fats, and omega-6s. So you want to avoid all of those things, and because those promote and feed the pro-inflammatory bacteria that are in the gut that lead to disease, that lead to increased intestinal permeability, which is the medical word for leaky gut, and increased immune stimulation and cytokines, which I talked about in part one, that fuel lots of neurological inflammation. Um, so this is just a little snapshot on that. Also, part of the figure covers the blood-brain barrier up here, which is also influenced by the diet. And then we have the vagus nerve and the spinal cord, and its reference to the ENS, which I talked about in part one. I've written a book called The Body Tune-Up, so I hope you'll check it out. It summarizes and basically lays out a plan for eating the foods that promote a healthy gut-brain connection. The book focuses on a 6-week food plan emphasizing proteins, vegetables, healthy fats. It has recipes and a menu plan, and talks a lot about the foundational processes in the body that keep inflammation under control and lead to wellness. This is a table of the bacteria that researchers know make neurotransmitters. And I just thought this was fascinating that researchers know which different strains of bacteria make dopamine, which is the neurotransmitter that, like, for example, helps us with motivation, or serotonin, which is the neurotransmitter that helps us experience pleasure. Um, and so, if you're eating certain foods, you're going to feed these different strains of bacteria and be much more likely to produce the neurotransmitters that are optimal. This study found in mice, so it wasn't in people, that the more people exercise, the gut microbes that help produce the neurotransmitters increase. So basically, by exercising, you can increase your neurotransmitter levels to a beneficial level. And just to point this out, if you didn't know, 50% of the body's dopamine is made in the enteric nervous system, the ENS in the gut, and 90% of serotonin is made in the gut. So the foods, there's lots of foods that can be helpful, but I really want to zero in on 2 types of foods. The first would be fermented foods. Lacto-fermented foods contain good bacteria, but they also help create an acidic environment, which helps with the pH for producing more beneficial bacteria and keeping the inflammatory bacteria and microbes and fungus in check. The other food I want to focus on is resistant starches. Resistant starches are high in lentils, broccoli, cold potato, cold rice, pumpkin, and beets. So by cold, I mean you cook the food, like you make the dish of mashed potatoes and then you put it in the refrigerator, and then you can either eat it cold or you can heat it up the next day and it will still contain the resistant starch. So when the mashed potatoes are hot, they're going, like, before you've let them cool off, they're going to be a type of carbohydrate that feeds much more inflammatory bacteria that can lead to other issues. But when you let the mashed potatoes cool down, they form a different type of starch called a resistant starch, which is amazing food for bacteria that protect us and protect our health and lead to better wellness. Broccoli is a great food for this also. It's high in resistant starch, especially the florets. And here's a study that just showed through this mechanism of feeding the good bacteria, it reduced irritable bowel disease. Here's a picture, hoping to inspire you, of my favorite current pumpkin soup recipe. It's got sausage and pumpkin and celery and kale and mushrooms and some potatoes. In the news recently, there was an article, this was just published last summer, showing that for every 10% increase, which is not like a lot, but for every 10% increase of the bacteria type that make the short chain fatty acids, they're called butyrate producers, the risk of hospitalization fell by 25%. So you get a big payoff in terms of protecting your health from things that can kill you or hospitalize you just by eating these resistant starches. This is an excerpt again from that article I referenced earlier in Nature Metabolism. And they summarize that short chain fatty acids, so those butyrates that are produced by the good bacteria, are implicated in gastrointestinal function, so digestive function, blood pressure regulation, circadian rhythm regulation. So that would be like how well can you fall asleep and sleep well and wake up and feel energetic during the day, and your neuroimmune function. So that could have implications on many things. Notably, alterations in the short chain fatty acids have been associated with Parkinson's disease, obesity, chronic psychosocial stress, and autism spectrum disorder. So if you're not making enough short chain fatty acids, there's a strong association with these other disorders. So this suggests a very strong link between short chain fatty acids and the gut-brain axis and the disorders that we can experience. I have another video available on my website. That's humannaturellc.com/news. This one goes into more detail about ways to boost gut diversity. Okay, so I've talked about the importance of digestive health and the importance of gut biota and the things you can do to help with those, or where to get more resources about that. Next, I want to talk about the hormone cortisol, because hormone regulation has a big impact on how well the gut-brain connection works. So cortisol regulation, that means the ability to have healthy levels of the stress hormones, correlates with gut health and with brain health, and it can be controlled and managed through diet and lifestyle. So I like to focus on this intervention when we're talking about the gut-brain connection. Just to give you an insight on some of the research that's out there, psychological disorders and neurodegenerative diseases typically can include a component of cortisol regulation. And that's talked about here. So anxiety, depression, Alzheimer's, all of these are known to be correlated with having cortisol levels that are not quite right, that are not optimized, that are either too low or too high or somehow dysregulated. We also see this in children with autism, where they have higher levels of cortisol, like even during play, for example, than neurotypical kids. And can be concerning, because those people in those populations who have higher cortisol levels are much more likely to experience neuroinflammation, because when the body's got too much cortisol, then the cortisol receptor in the cell begins to not function normally. And this can lead to a lot of inflammation downstream in the nerves, in the nervous system. And we know that those with high cortisol are prone to more health issues. So this talks about stress, depression, diet, and the connection to the gut. We also know that cortisol regulation is linked to cancer, for example, also. And this is a big deal because cortisol will thin the gut lining. So it thins the barrier between our gut and our bloodstream, and it also thins the barrier between our blood and our brains. And when those barriers are deteriorated, like is showed here, where you see the tight junctions breaking down, then we have a lot more inflammation, because the barriers are there to protect us and keep our immune system from creating a lot of inflammatory reactions to everything we might encounter or that might get into our bloodstream. And once that barrier is compromised, then there's a lot more immune, inflammatory, chronic processes happening. And that is one of the main facets of disease. I have another video called Natural Solutions for Leaky Gut on my website that talks a lot more about the various things that help with leaky gut, since we don't have time in this one. Here's a picture of the blood-brain barrier, and you can see that there are tight junctions here as well. So too much cortisol is going to thin these barriers and potentially compromise the integrity. So ways to support better cortisol management. Well, the good news is actually you can control cortisol levels a lot with better blood sugar control. Cortisol's job as a stress hormone is to get fuel into your cells, right? If you're facing a stress, your body's got to make sure the fuel's getting where it needs to go so that you can react or not react, or whatever you're going to do. But you need to have fuel to do that. So when the blood sugar is too low, cortisol naturally increases. So if someone is in a state where their blood sugar is up and down, especially experiencing a lot of lows, then they're going to be much more susceptible to high cortisol levels and the damage and neuroinflammation from those high levels and the changes to the gut, and the gut biota and the gut lining and the immune system that would follow. Okay, so I like to bring this up because it's actually really simple, like a very simple thing. If you're trying to improve your diet and you just focus on this one thing, it can really translate to so many benefits. And that is eating protein every 3 to 4 hours throughout the day. If you do this, it will regulate your blood sugar so that your cortisol levels are kept more in check. And then you won't be wanting to eat as much sugar and processed foods, which also very much create dysregulation with cortisol. So it's kind of a win-win. Cortisol and blood sugar are known to be issues. Here's in the scientific literature, here's a story that was published where scientists are finding that children with autism have markedly lower than normal levels of the enzymes needed to digest carbohydrates and complex sugars. And so that's affecting how they absorb the sugar. So it's affecting their blood sugar levels and their cortisol levels. It's also potentially feeding the more inflammatory bacteria in the gut if they're having trouble absorbing it in the gut. Furthermore, those who experience a neurodegeneration, like someone with Alzheimer's, will do much better on a low carb diet because they typically are losing tolerance and also having an inability to break down the carbs and sugars and use those carbs and sugars as fuel for the nervous system and the brain. Scientists have been talking for many years about how Alzheimer's is known also as type 3 diabetes because it co-occurs when the body can no longer burn glucose in those cells because it's become so insulin resistant. So it's very important to follow a low carbohydrate diet to promote brain health. The other thing that really helps cortisol regulation is being in the sun. So I encourage everybody to go outside every day, even in the winter. Try to go outside 30 minutes, even when it's cold. I'll be taking my 2 walks a day when it's bitterly cold, or at least an hour or two when the weather is better. You will definitely, most people will notice that that translates to better mood and better health because that is our innate way of regulating cortisol is based on the natural light. So when we're indoors and we're in a predominant blue light dominated situation, the body does not regulate its energy or its hormone levels as easily. Red light in the environment is especially good for balancing cortisol because red light, which is most present during sunrise and sunset, helps with the regulation of melatonin, which also helps us to sleep. So those would be key times to try to go outside to watch a sunrise or sunset every day too. If you can't get outside as much as you would like, or you just want to do more to optimize your health, getting a red light for indoors can be very helpful. And there's lots of different red lights, but to really break it down, anything that's red will help with managing cortisol and give you other benefits. So we've covered digestive health, gut biome, cortisol regulation. Finally, I want to end talking about vagal tone because the vagus nerve plays such a big role in the gut-brain connection, which I talked about in the part 1 video. Here's a picture of the vagus nerve again. Remember, it's in yellow in the picture, and a lot of the vagus nerve, a lot of the tissue is around the throat area. So we might see issues with vagal tone if someone has a swallowing issue or an issue with emptying their stomach. Sometimes people who have chronic nausea need help. That's a sign they need help with vagal tone. But the things that you can do to help with the vagus nerve often focus around doing things with your throat because there's so much nerve tissue there. So basically, if you want to have healthier vagal tone, you need to do more things that help strengthen the vagus nerve. And the following things are known by researchers to do that. So humming, singing, laughing, these are all free, easy things to do. Gargling, so that would be like you're in the shower and you want to gargle and you want to do it pretty hard, like you're an opera singer. Or if you're laughing to stimulate your vagus nerve, you're going to do it hard enough until you start to tear. Because when you start to tear from gargling or laughing or whatever, that means you've stimulated the vagus nerve. Gagging, you can gag yourself with a toothbrush. And this is an activity that's really good for people who have chronic digestive issues, especially if your issue is low motility, like you're not very regular, you're constipated, or you have a lot of bloating. Then the gagging and gargling and humming, all those things really help wake up the vagus nerve, which helps with stimulating motility again. Different types of exercises like interval training and endurance training have been shown to increase vagal tone, deep breathing, meditation, cold therapy. So taking a cold dip, ice cold shower, going outside without a thick coat when it's very cold. Those are all great ways to stimulate vagal tone. So is heat therapy and sauna. And then finally, we circle back to the prebiotic and probiotic foods. If you've got the right bacteria in your gut, then those help promote good vagal tone. And then another thing in the diet that's very helpful is omega 3s. Omega 3s come from fish and seafood. They can come from flax, but not everybody can digest them from flax. So fish and seafood are universal ways to get omega 3s. I encourage all people, customers, clients who come and talk to me to eat fish and seafood every day if they tolerate it to get adequate omega 3s. And finally, sleep. When we're sleeping, it helps restore vagal tone. So investing a lot of time and energy and making sure that you've got good quality sleep is a great payoff for gut-brain connection. Once you've done those four things, then that's amazing. Sometimes there are some other roadblocks to having a healthy gut-brain connection. And in this case, I would drill down and look in more detail at omega 3s. I would look at someone's blood work and assess whether or not they have low iron, because people with GI issues tend to have low iron because they're not absorbing. Also, I see low B12 and folate, either because people in the populations more susceptible to these neurological disorders have methylation issues, or a lot of people just have an inadequate diet. The only way to get B12 in food in the amount that most people need is by eating red meat. And a lot of people don't eat red meat because of misinformation out there about red meat and its value for health. So many times that B12 and folate need to be addressed. This is an example of some of the basic labs that I work with people that help to further the gut-brain connection and wellness. And then there's a lot of other, if you have access to resources, financial resources, there's many ways that you can reduce inflammation, neurological inflammation through testing. So you can identify your food sensitivities so you know what triggers might be setting off the gut-brain connection. You can actually test your neurotransmitter levels and then change your diet and take supplements and change habits to promote better neurotransmitter balance. You can test your omega 3s versus omega 6 so you know how well you're doing with that. And then this test is one of my favorite tests to work with. It's a stool test that gives me a comprehensive list of information about how to help rehabilitate someone's gut. It's called the GI map, and it's done with Diagnostic Solutions. But again, some of these tests are more expensive, so hopefully you feel like I did offer a lot of free activities that anybody can do to help promote the gut-brain connection. So in summary, part one video talked about the gut-brain connection and all the scientific research that's out there showing how it affects our well-being. And then in this part two video, I thought I'd summarize by having a little fun and of reminding you of the things that can help by rooms of the house since I'm recording this in the winter. So in the kitchen, focusing on foods that are prebiotic, like the fermented foods and resistant starches are good, and focusing on protein every 3 to 4 hours to regulate cortisol, very important. In the bathroom, you can do things like gargling in the shower, gagging, just keeping better tabs on your digestive health, and taking steps to improve healthy regularity and having pain-free digestion. In the bedroom, focusing on better sleep and relaxation by making sure there's a nice red light environment after hours, before you're going to sleep, and just putting a lot of energy into making sure the environment is nice and dark and quiet or whatever you need, the right temperature for sleeping. In the living room, things that promote gut brain connection focus on the vagal tone. So, meditation, laughing, singing. When you're doing your workout, doing interval training and some endurance training. When you're outdoors, making sure you're outdoors, even if it is cloudy. Of course, when it's sunny, we all can tell the benefit of that. But even when it's cloudy, the light environment is much higher and healthier for us than an indoor environment. And then for those people that need it, you can work with me one-on-one for individual fine tuning and assessments. So thank you so much for joining me. I'll see you next time.